Critic James Bernardinelli says that although this film wasn't the first movie to pair up a couple of wisecracking best friends in an action-adventure setting, this film became the model of how well that approach could work when done right. Letterboxd user Liam, spelled Liiyam, says not a cell phone in sight, just people living in the moment. And about its prequel, Letterboxd user Cowboy Pink says, "This is the messiest prequel I've ever seen, and I had a blast every minute watching it." On this episode of Ruined Childhoods, we decide the fate of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Sequel. Reboot. Which one will it be? It's the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to Ruined Childhoods. I'm Dan. How are you? Well, with me is John.
A few episodes ago, you were like, "Oh, I want to introduce you, because I always kind of hop in."
Can I start over?
No.
Oh my goodness. Hi. Full disclosure, I'm tired.
Hey. What are you going to do?
No. Well, what am I going to do is talk about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, because I feel like that will wake me up. And
I got to say, we'll do a little bit of blobbity blah before we get into the whoosy whatsies, but all I got to say, those are two guys who never get tired.
For real.
They have some stamina.
Well, yes, and that is a point I definitely want to get back to. But
we will get back to that. But first, Dan, how's it going? How has your life been? Have you had an opportunity to watch any movies aside from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
Let me think about that. And of course, I have to think back to what I've been watching as I've been doing other things. So it's usually a smattering of random, depending on what I'm in the mood for. You know what I've been working my way through on our sentimental favorite stars is a movie called Talk to Me. And it's, based on the true story of Petey Green, who was an ex-convict that was hired as a DJ at a Washington, D.C. soul station in the late 60s. And he takes off. He's like an overnight sensation. He's, he says he's very open. And it takes you through his career and how he goes from just being this really popular Washington, D.C. area DJ. And then, the guy who I guess kind of produced his show started managing him and getting him booked in these stand-up gigs, and he goes on the Tonight Show and he speaks his mind. And it's kind of it's the story. I feel like, we hear the story of Richard Pryor, but not as much Petey Green. And, and Richard Pryor's got an amazing story. And I've been watching some of his stand-up recently, just kind of going back. And I'd never really watched any of his concert films. And I was watching it and I was like, oh, this is Eddie Murphy Delirious before Eddie Murphy Delirious. I'm like, oh wow. And I mean, I love Eddie Murphy as a stand-up comic. He had such an amazing energy, possibly still could. But he I was watching this Richard Pryor special and I'm like, oh, okay. That's two shades from what Eddie's doing.
Sure, yeah.
just a few years later. So
Yeah.
Anyway, those are the things that I've been watching. Talk to Me, and of course Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and
Dan.
yeah.
I want to talk. You're getting me thinking about kind of those more classic stand-up comedy specials, and it just makes me think about how, and I don't know what years the Richard Pryor specials that you're thinking of were those in the later 70s?
Yeah, I think
80s?
this one was late 70s. It was on Netflix.
Well, I'm just thinking, because I've definitely been mostly exposed to 80s and 90s stand-up specials, and I feel like they had a special quality to them that are very specific to the time, that I feel like now there's so many stand-up specials that I feel like they all kind of blend together. I mean, there are certain ones that stand out a little bit more than some of the others, but I don't know, there's just something about, you talk about Delirious or even Raw, and they had these personalities. And granted, of course, speaking about Eddie Murphy, it's, his personality is part of who he was, part of what these specials were. And, of course, people think, they can remember exactly what he wore because it was so specific. And I think a lot about some of the stand-up that I watched or listened to on cassettes growing up, which was a lot of, your cassette tapes that I would borrow from like Comic Relief and stuff like that.
Yes.
And
I was just going to say, and I need to find that. I forget which Comic Relief it was, but I think I could still recite some of the acts word for word. I think I could still do Stephen Wright's act.
Stephen Wright's act. Well, I mean, that one, it's
I got pulled over
words.
for speeding. The officer said, "Didn't you read the sign on didn't you read the speed limit sign?" I said, "I don't believe everything I read."
Yeah.
Like,
that for him, it's
Paula Poundstone was on that.
Paula Poundstone, Dennis Miller,
Dana Carvey did Chopping Broccoli on it. I'm pretty sure.
There were so many amazing acts on there, and I think that's something that was so special about those Comic Relief specials. Is it's shorter sets, and I think that there was something about that made a lot of the bits more memorable. As opposed to when you have like an hour special, and going back to Eddie Murphy, I mean, people could recite, those Eddie Murphy specials probably word for word, and probably still reference them to this day. Maybe some more than others.
Well, I had this conversation recently, and with both Delirious and Raw, like, yes, there's some of it that does not transition well to 2022. There is some of it that just it is dated, and it's like, this is not comedy anymore. But there's so much more in it that is great. In Delirious, when he does Elvis,
the whole Lemonade.
Yeah. Like, fuck it, have him sing his dialogue.
Yeah.
Elvis, you want some lemonade?
We're gonna win this race.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. See, it's a trigger right there.
So, right.
But there's so much of it. There's so much of it that I think that stands up, and pun, I guess, intended.
That
pun
holds
unavoidable. Pun holds up. All right. There
holds
we go.
Up, yeah.
Well, yes. And it speaks, I think it speaks to what I've heard a lot of comedians gripe about, which is like, oh, like, we can't be funny anymore.
Oh.
And it's like, well, no, you can't be funny at the expense of entire groups of people.
Right.
And it's not that people weren't offended then. They just didn't feel like they could say anything.
Yeah, they weren't comfortable. Yeah, speaking up. Because there was not as supportive of a of a group of people. So
Right.
I think that not to go off on a huge any more of a huge thing about stand-up comedy and the style of different decades. When we're doing an episode that's about an iconic Western from the late 60s. But, you were just talking about this show that you're watching. Is it a movie or a show?
It was it's Richard Pryor live in concert.
I was talking about
Talk to Me. Talk to Me. It is a movie. It stars Don Cheadle as Petey Green.
Oh, awesome.
Chiwetel Ejiofor. I
Great.
don't know if I got that right. He plays Pete, like the manager / producer.
Okay.
Martin Sheen is in it as the guy who, like, I don't know if he's like the station manager or just or like the owner of the station. He's in it, and I want to say Taraji P. Henson is in it. I just want to confirm because I'm like, it's 2007. Yeah, it's Taraji P. Henson. Yeah, great. Cedric the Entertainer has a part in it.
Oh wow.
It is and it's really powerful, and it like takes you through like you're there with them when the news breaks of Martin Luther King's assassination. And like riots in DC, and how like how this DJ stopped these riots. And really like rallied people together. So I highly recommend it. And by the way, directed by Cassie Lemons, who we've talked about before, and I don't believe we've covered any of her films. We've talked about her just kind of talking about her work, and she is also in The Silence of the Lambs as Clarice's friend. But yeah, she directed Harriet, the Harriet Tubman movie that was out a couple of years ago. Okay. Yeah, and also directed like a movie that we should definitely do, Eve's Bayou.
I was just gonna say Eve's Bayou.
Eve's Bayou is fucking great.
Yeah, I mean, that we should totally talk about that. She also did a lot of television. It looks like Luke Cage, and is working on I Want to Dance with Somebody. Interesting.
Oh, is it the Whitney Houston movie?
Nice. It'd be weird if it wasn't.
Well, it could be a movie. It could be one of those movies where it's like, we're gonna take the title of a popular.
Oh. Yeah,
Take Me Home Tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't the Eddie Money story. But anyway, John, have you been watching anything recently? I feel like we've been talking about Talk to Me for like 10 minutes.
I watched last night. I just wanted to put something on, and I have seen before, and that I was like, I don't really remember too much about it, and I put on Michael Clayton.
Oh,
yeah.
Have I shared my Michael Clayton story before?
What's your Michael Clayton story? Are we going to do a Michael Clayton episode? Should we save it for that?
I mean, I don't know when we're going to do a Michael Clayton episode. I might as well tell it now.
You teed it up. Tell your Michael Clayton story.
Yeah, I'll tell it now. No, so back in I want to say this was early 2005. I was temping at the time in New York City, and I had a 3-week temp position at the Hilton on 6th Avenue.
Right.
Where Michael Clayton was filming. And they were filming various scenes in and around the hotel, including like the scene towards the end when like Tilda Swinton is in that conference room and he comes in. I haven't seen it in a long time, but like I remember this. It might have been early 2006. I forget. But so they were filming, and this was like I was working in the like in amenities, so I kind of just had to make sure that people like had things. I didn't like interact with anyone really, but one day I was on lunch break, and they were filming a shot outside where it was just George Clooney, crossing the street and walking like past the camera into the hotel.
Okay.
And I was like, I'll watch. And I kind of positioned myself. I got good position. And yeah, Clooney walked like right past me, and he's like my height. And that
how does a George Clooney smell? Does your memory go back that far? Good. Okay.
Well, no, you know what I was just doing. You heard there was a silence there. I was having a recall of the waft as George Clooney.
You gotta love the waft.
Passed me, and it was like everything. Like you could, with that, from that smell, you could imagine the type of wallet he carried, and exactly the shade of brown of the leather, and like where it was worn, and you'd like that smell, and it was just is everything you'd hope for, and then some. Really.
Well,
so
Dan, speaking of wallets, I know two guys who would probably steal George Clooney's wallet if they had a chance, and that's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Now, you and I both know George Clooney would ride along with him, and it would be Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and George Clooney. And
his
fabulous smell.
Okay, I think that George Clooney would get along great with Butch and Sundance, probably largely due to the fact that he is, at one of our generation's like equivalents to like a Paul Newman type.
Well, yeah.
The kind of like the graying hair, young in their life. The charming can kind of get away with anything with just a little bit of a smile kind of attitude.
And I feel like, and I'm sorry if I'm putting the cart before the horse or like blowing any spots here, but it's the elephant in the room that George Clooney has collaborated so much, particularly on the Ocean's films, with like this generation's Robert Redford.
Yeah, Brad Pitt.
Yeah. Who very much like who very much, especially when you see like A River Runs Through It, which is narrated by Robert Redford, and like Brad Pitt very much looking like a young Robert Redford in it. It's impossible to ignore. So anyway, but Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
So we're in the late 60s here. We've got two of the most attractive men to have ever lived together. We've got Catherine Ross, and the three of them are just kind of tearing it up in a very non-conventional movie. It's really not what you would expect from any type of Western. It's got just these great character moments, and I'd gotta say, like, when we are introduced to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, it tells you everything you need to know about these two guys, and in such a fun way. And I had so much fun watching this movie. And I'm not a real Western guy, but I think that that's because like this wasn't like a cowboy movie. It wasn't a.
It's a buddy. Well, it's a buddy picture.
It's a buddy picture.
It's a buddy picture.
Yeah, there was just something about it where it's like, when we watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that one is more traditional, spaghetti Western, and it's like this mysterious guy. He's just like the man, and you're
the tumbleweed.
You just kind of have to, you just have to kind of go along with it. Whereas this one, they bring you along with it, like they get you in there, and they get you to just like absolutely root for these bad guys, these thieves.
Right. Well, you just can't help it. So John, why don't you throw the synopsis out there, and then we will talk more about what makes this film so like wonderful and unique, and therefore really challenging to talk about in terms of like the whole remake, reboot, sequel, prequel.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right, so here we go. This story begins long into the thieving lives of two outlaws, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Along with their gang, the Wild Bunch, Butch and Sundance were notorious bank and train robbers and had quite the reputation during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Seriously, this is based on a true story. After a train robbery went awry and the Union Pacific's militia catches them in the act robbing a train, Butch and Sundance's entire gang gets wiped out or chased away. While on a long-term chase, they pick up Sundance's girlfriend Etta and make their way to Bolivia. They'd come back once the heat died down and enlist in the army to fight the Spanish. While in Bolivia, they scratch some itches by robbing some banks and then attempt to go straight and get jobs. But when they end up in a violent situation that gets them recognized, it's just Butch and Sundance versus the Bolivian army. And that's all I got. I'm going to just run down to some of the cast. Paul Newman is Butch Cassidy. Robert Redford is the Sundance Kid. Catherine Ross plays Etta. The three of them are kind of, history's first kind of throuple. Etta and Butch Cassidy don't exactly have a relationship, but they clearly are in love with each other. They sure do ride a bike together. They sure do ride a bike together. But no, Etta had met Sundance first, so she and Sundance are together. That's the deal with that. We've got, the other notable people that I should mention. Cloris Leachman has a role as a sex worker and is very funny. And it was just one of those situations where I was just like, oh my God, she has just always been Cloris Leachman. She's always been Cloris Leachman. Even in a role like this. Yes. Yeah. Oh, she was so funny. And then we have a young Sam Elliott in a role as a card player. So if you didn't believe that such a thing could exist and you thought that Sam Elliott was born at around 60 and just kind of like hovered between 60 and 75. This was his second movie. He was in The Way West in an uncredited role. But then, here we go. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, just as card player number 2. And aside from that, Dan, I don't know if there was anybody else in the cast that you were familiar with. I could say that there were a lot of people in the cast that I thought were quite fantastic. I loved Henry Jones as the bike salesman and Jeff Corey as Sheriff Bledsoe. He's great, but what about Kenneth Mars as he's the marshal who's trying to get a posse to go after Butch and Sundance. Butch and Sundance are up in the brothel. Kenneth Mars, who I believe was in Young Frankenstein, I believe, so with Cloris Leachman as well. But also our fellow Police Academy fans would know Kenneth Mars as the mayor in Police Academy 6, City Under Siege. So he was King Triton in The Little Mermaid, the voice of King Triton. Was he now? Yeah, according to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is never wrong. This, probably not. I'm pretty sure that's a verifiable fact. I'm not worried about Wikipedia bluffing on this one. No. Weird lie to tell. Kenneth Mars is also Franz Liebken in the original film of The Producers. Right. Yes. And so, yes, you're talking about the scene where he's trying to get a posse together and he's like, all right, who here has guns? And no one raises their hands. And he's like, all right, who wants to be issued a gun? No one answers. And then he's like, aren't you outraged? And this one guy's comes up on the stage and he's like, I'm outraged and I can't blah, 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 blah. But he's really just using it as an opportunity to sell this new invention, the bicycle that he's trying to sell to people. And he's just like, hey, you got the audience together. I'm going to take advantage of this. It was so funny. That's where the bicycle comes in for this famous bicycle scene with Paul Newman and Catherine Ross and some raindrops that are falling on people's heads. Yeah, John, I wanted to ask you about that. Actually, hold on. The one other person I want to point out, only because
like you see this guy and you hear this guy and you recognize him from Blazing Saddles if you've seen it, George Firth, who also known as like the librettist of like Company and Merrily We Roll Along, who plays Woodcock, the guy who's like guarding the money on the train and who keeps saying,
he was really funny.
Oh, he's great, but as soon as you see him and hear him, you'll remember him as one of the townspeople from Blazing Saddles. He's the one who like keeps echoing, "That's right, we'll write the governor for a new sheriff."
Yeah, you know, he's got a really fantastic filmography. His final one being Bulworth, believe it or not.
Oh, no shit.
Absolutely. As older man. But then there's things in there like Cannonball Run and Hooper and Oh God. We also have Shampoo, a Sleeper. He's just been in like all these kind of classic movies, a lot of really funny stuff too. So thanks for pointing that out. But yeah, that's he's a lot of fun.
And all due respect to the rest of the cast, but I am now done.
Oh, of course,
with my cast shout outs.
Yeah. And I also, I really wanted to shout out the sheriff who they come and visit, and Sheriff Bledsoe, played by Jeff Corey. Mm-hmm. And what they do is he sees them and he's like, oh, geez, like he knows that they're gonna tie him up, so he essentially ties himself up for them. It's so good.
But Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, say like there's just these notorious villains where it's like, they're going to win, so you may as well just play along, and you can say whatever you want to them, but the fact is you can do it the easy way or the hard way. And we're at a point in their careers as thieves where people just do it the easy way and they tie themselves up for them.
Yeah. And it brings me back to saying that, like, this is me. I mean, is it the first buddy movie? Because it even has like like Tango. It's the type of thing that like happens with Tango and Cash. It feels so similar to that sometimes. Like particularly Tango and Cash for some reason is what I keep thinking of.
Yeah, but I will say Tango and Cash is a little different in the sense that like they don't get along.
Well, they're forced to be. They're put together. They eventually get along, but I'm like that type of. I mean, Lethal Weapon's the same way,
right?
And like at first they don't get along, and then 5 movies later, one of them's a Nazi, and then there's Danny Glover. I mean, man, Danny Glover is so awesome. He like almost makes up for Mel Gibson being.
It's like I guess I could watch it just for the Danny Glover of it all.
Yeah,
and then the Joe Pesci of it all.
Oh, absolutely. No. But that's not what but it has the feel. It feels more like a buddy film than a traditional Western, like you were saying, like A Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. And I mean, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, they're just so amazing. They're looking like they're having the time of their life. Like we were saying before, they've got the stamina of a bull. It's amazing.
Well, this movie is paced exquisitely.
It even to the point where a like 4-minute sequence of riding a bicycle in funny ways with a contemporary song, like doesn't take you out of it at all.
You're right. I have no idea how or why, because every time I watch this movie, and this might be maybe the 4th or 5th time I've seen it. I mean, I always get to that sequence and I'm like, what's like, just, is it, we're in the 60s, and it also to me feels, I think this time around, I was able to pinpoint a little better what about it feels off to me. And it brings me back to the beginning of the movie, where you see it's set up like a silent film, like the very early days of cinema. This silent film about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid being and the hole in the wall gang, as they call them in this, because you couldn't get it confused with the movie The Wild Bunch, which was what they were called.
The hole in the wall gang, right? I called them the Wild Bunch in the synopsis, but
I mean, but that was like the real name. They just had to change it for the movie, but it sets it up so that okay, this is a retelling of this story. It's a fictionalized version. It sets it up, and there are even those couple of interludes, like the New York sequence, where they have. Oh my goodness! Which that is, to me, that was awesome, because it had the old timey music and the photos, and it didn't feel like. Don't forget, it's the 60s.
Yeah, well, I think that there was a lot of a lot going on with the direction of George Roy Hill. And, if you look at his filmography, it's not, it's a lot of like musicals or, adaptations of theatrical performances, like stage plays and stuff. And I think that there's a lot of influence just coming from the changing pace of filmmaking in the 60s, where, in the earlier 60s, you were seeing a lot more of these just like movie musicals and more traditional type of films. And then I should rephrase that, because traditional to me means what was current then. But, you see a lot of these things where it was just like, oh, this is a nice story in a lot of ways. There were some exceptions, but I will say that like towards the end of the 60s, that's when things started getting really experimental, and people were playing with form a lot more. And I could just see this as, George Roy Hill's experience of just trying to step out of his comfort zone a little bit and do something a little bit different, and put in a 4-minute, music video, and then put in this whole long sequence of still photos with music with nothing else. And it's just like, you get everything, but I love you that. Enjoy it.
I love that sequence, because it actually did, it told the story. It was like, hey, and then Butch, Sundance, and Etta were in New York for a little while before they shipped off to Bolivia. And they could have done that though with like 10% of the amount of material that they actually used. But the fact that they went for it is, sets it apart. But I would have preferred that in place of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Now, that said, I'm so glad that you mentioned it as a music video, as that's.
Well, I think that you said that on the last episode.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. So as I was watching it, I began to wonder, is this what they're spoofing in The Naked Gun? Oh. Like at least in some small way, in The Naked Gun, were they consciously spoofing when they do the, something tells me I'm into something good sequence? I
don't know. Then a Naked Gun movie spoofing something? I just don't see it.
I know it would be like, but come on. We're talking about Jerry Zucker, the director of Ghost, an Academy Award nominated film for Best Picture, an Academy Award winning film, mind you, for Best Supporting Actress.
Well, there's something else that I do want to talk about with this Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head sequence. So this sets up the dynamic between Butch and Etta. And at this point, we already know that Etta and Sundance are together. we find out in a scene where you're just like, you're holding your breath and so nervous that, oh no, is Sundance a real skis ball? And then it is revealed that like, oh no, this is just a thing that they do.
This was your first time seeing it,
This was
right?
my first time seeing it, yeah. So
yeah.
there's this whole thing where like he's waiting for her in the darkness, and they have, and she comes in and she's all startled, and he's just like, take your clothes off, and like he makes her strip, and then he kind of goes up to her and she's just like, I just have one question. What took you so long? And it's just like, oh, thank God.
It's a great
it's a really great moment.
It's a great moment.
So, but going back to Butch and Etta, they have this conversation where it's just the two of them, and it's just like, they're talking about how they feel about each other, and he asks her like, if you would have met me first, would we be together? And she's like, yeah, but I didn't. And and I felt like that was setting us up for some sort of conflict, or like something that was going to come up later on where there's Sundance gets mad at Butch because of something having to do with Etta or something like that, and nothing like that ever happened. And I felt like, well, what is the purpose of Butch and Etta having romantic feelings for one another that must be unrequited if there's not going to be any sort of resolution? Like, can't a guy and a lady just be friends? Does it have to always come down to a relationship thing? So anyway,
when Butch met Etta,
yeah, right. The age old question of, can a man and woman really just be friends? Yeah. So anyway, I was expecting a little something extra with that, creating some sort of conflict between the two, but you never really get any conflict between the two of them. Anything that you do gets kind of mild. And resolved pretty quickly.
Right.
They get a little antsy with each other, but
There's
it's
tension.
Certainly nothing serious.
Right. Yeah. It's buddy movie tension. Yeah, absolutely. Because also, like, Sundance is much more serious. He's much more serious. He's much more focused. He's the one who remains wary when they're on the run from, as they discover this like renowned tracker, Lord Baltimore, and the bounty hunter. Did you enjoy that there? Yeah.
Okay. So Dan, I don't know the answer to this question. Is the character LaFours from Mallrats named after LaFours and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
The hat. He wears the same hat.
I completely forgot about the hat. The white hat. That
in
I don't remember that.
The white, straw hat. It is absolutely. And what's funny is I remember when I was watching it, I thought to myself, I was like, I'm pretty sure John's never seen this before, and I'm like, I know he's gonna like get that.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yep, he wears that hat.
Yeah,
amazing.
Absolutely. LaFours, Kevin Smith definitely based LaFours in Mallrats on LaFours in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
I love that. It's fun when you can watch a movie from 1969 that you've never seen before, and then it makes you think about a movie from what year did Mallrats come out? Like 96? 95? Where and that I haven't seen in the longest time, and I'm like, isn't that the guy from Mallrats? I haven't seen Mallrats in ages.
Yeah, but how many times did you watch it back in the day?
Oh, a zillion times.
Right, exactly. It's implanted. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's that's another great thing about this movie. It's just it's so iconic that, it's absolutely, I mean, it's beyond doubt that Kevin Smith based LaFours on LaFours.
Oh, yeah, it's just funny that like I hadn't even considered the fact that like a character from mall rats would have been specifically named after this. And it's like, I never considered that it was a reference to something else. Yeah.
Right. No. Yeah. Because and I'm pretty sure that the first time I saw Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was it before I saw? I'm pretty sure it was after I saw Mallrats for the first time.
Okay.
Because, and it seems unlikely because I would have seen, because Mallrats came out when I was in college, and I feel like I saw Butch Cassidy when I was in high school. But I also feel like every time I've seen this movie, I've recognized LaFours as being the LaFours from Mallrats, and not like I didn't have the other way around. It wasn't like the first time I saw Mallrats, I was like, oh, from Butch Cassidy.
Yeah.
So anyway, point made. LaFours is LaFours.
LaFours is LaFours. That's right. So, Dan, so you said that you think that you saw this in high school?
It feels like the type of movie that, like, I would have borrowed it from Pour One Out, Mr. Roberts. Ed Roberts, who, if you're a film buff in high school, and like you see Ed Roberts' classroom, his door like laminated with little like cut out images from movie posters and stills and things like that, and then the walls of his classroom just covered with just posters, and he's all shit everywhere. And he had this amazing, I've talked about it on here before, his VHS collection that he
had everything cataloged. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I still have the catalog.
Amazing.
And like, yeah, I borrowed so many movies from him, so it feels like it's one of the movies I would have borrowed from him, but I don't think I saw it until like I was in later college. I definitely saw it for the first time on VHS, or I possibly like just on like cable, like on Turner Classic Movies.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But I know I had a taped off TV but no commercials copy of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So it must have been from like TCM.
Yeah.
Or like Fox Movies.
Right.
One of those. I don't know. Yeah. Well, and this was your first time.
This was my first time. Yeah. And it was, I had a feeling that I was going to enjoy it because I love Paul Newman. I love Robert Redford. Like, worst case, I'm watching a Paul Newman and Robert Redford movie, Like, that's kind of how I feel about either one of them. Like, I don't think that there's a single movie that either one of them are starring in that I would watch and be like, there's just nothing I liked about this. Those two are amazing, and they're clearly amazing together. As we know, they work together again on The Sting, another George Roy Hill production.
One of my favorites, one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, and even and Paul Newman even went on to work with him again in Slapshot. It's just one of those things that I always notice about directors, and it's like when the actors work with them together again and again, like you have to believe that they had just had a fantastic time on the set of like the first one. And this one, they're clearly on location, at least most of the time, probably in Wyoming or wherever. Like some of those scenes just look so beautiful. I mean, I'm sure that some of it was backlot stuff, but there was a lot of it that just looked absolutely amazing. And I don't know, the chemistry between those two, it's really infectious. I loved watching it. Even the moments where you're just like, what are they doing here? Like, some of those moments where it's just like, here we go. Like, I am on board for this movie. I will enjoy whatever they've got. And, I'd say this is a spoiler. This is a movie that, a lot of people probably know about, how it ends. And
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of the time I was just thinking, it's just like, all right, when is that going to happen? And yeah.
Well, because it's a movie that never, it really hardly stops. Like, raindrops keep falling on my head is when it's like, they're on the run. And like you referred to it in the synopsis as like this extended chase. And it's something I liked about it. It was like, yes, it probably should feel like this feels right. That like they're kind of like they keep running and stopping and they're running again, that this is going on and like this is the life that they live. This is the life they've chosen. So it makes that point, especially because of how not like nonchalantly they take it, though Butch certainly seems to take things a little bit more in stride.
Yeah.
But it keeps going, but it builds. And it's kind of like this, if you think about, I don't know, I think about a train, and you think about a train really picking up and like, starting out slow, but it keeps moving. It's always moving. And eventually it's, barreling. And that's, what happens when they get to Bolivia, and then there's no slowing that train down. It's a full stop.
Right. I know. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about what ended up happening in terms of, what we talk about on the show, which is like, how to keep a property alive with a sequel or a prequel or so on and so forth. And this had a prequel, Butch and Sundance, The Early Days, and or as Death and Bogus Journey would call it, the early years. And
that's what I always think of.
And it's got, Tom Berenger as Butch, and it's got William Catt as Sundance. And I believe that Jeff Corey reprises his role as Sheriff Bledsoe. We got Peter Weller as LaFours.
RoboCop himself.
Yeah. So
Christopher
I think that
Lloyd is in. Oh, Brian Dennehy's in it. Awesome.
Yeah, and I haven't watched it. I watched like the trailer, and I was like, okay, Tom Berenger's doing his best effort. I feel like William Catt feels a little miscast. Dan, why is your jaw dropped?
Because I'm looking at the cast and I can't believe my eyes, because I somewhat doubt that any of the characters in this are Russian, but yet there is Elia Baskin, known as the Russian guy you see in every movie that has Russian guys and TV shows, the Americans. And he's playing a bookkeeper in this, and I wonder if like, I'm like, is this guy not even Russian?
No, he's Russian.
Yeah, I know, but anyway, it actually that makes me want to watch this more than anything else. That and Vincent Schiavelli is in it as a guard.
Vincent Schiavelli, yeah. It's funny. So I'm just looking at some of the stuff on Wikipedia for Butch and Sundance, The Early Days. It says William Catt had recently made First Love and was being called a young Robert Redford, so ended up being cast as Sundance, which is so funny. Like watching just the trailer, it's just like, no, he's not a young Robert Redford. Tom Berenger's a more convincing, at least I think, Paul Newman. But I think that this is a little too similar, and it's making me think about is it Dumb and Dumberer, the prequel to Dumb and Dumber, where it's like,
oh, When Harry Met Lloyd.
Is it When Harry Met Lloyd? Yeah. And so, and it's or Dumb and Dumber 2, When Harry Met Lloyd, is that what it was? But
no,
it was
but
it's like, these actors that are doing impressions of performances of other actors, and it's kind of like you're trapped because these actors give these iconic performances, and you don't have as much liberty to kind of bring something new to it. And I don't know, like I I understand, Dan, why you'd be interested in watching this, to see the like Brian Dennehy, Peter Weller, Christopher Lloyd, Vincent Schiavelli of it all. But I don't know if I'd be able to get past the Tom Berenger and William Catt of it all.
Well, yeah, and I mean, both Tom Berenger and William Catt, by the way, are like, excellent actors who've given phenomenal performances in films where they were cast well. Just look at 1986, where you have Manhunter and Platoon.
Yeah.
For example. But that's where we are. Is it's like, what do you do with? It's like, you've got a true story.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like we don't really talk about too many like movies that are based on reality. We don't do like biopics or anything like that so much. I'm sure we have at some point, but this is I don't know, this is one that's so specific, where it's like, not only like, okay, we don't know what Butch and Sundance were like personality wise exactly, but it probably wasn't the way that Paul Newman and Robert Redford played them, but they played them in such a specific way that it's like, what really can you do? And we certainly unfortunately can't do anything with them now. Paul Newman passed away quite some time ago. Robert Redford's still out there doing his thing, which is great. But I'm just going to kind of launch into it. I think that a comic book series is the way to go in my mind, where it's like,
yes.
a graphic novels or something, because you'd be able to kind of capture the essence of the performances from Robert Redford and Paul Newman without having to like really fake it. You can kind of bring in the style, and if somebody has
need a good writer.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody has seen the movies, then they can put the idiosyncrasies into their minds behind what's being drawn and what's being written. But if you haven't, then I'm sure that you can formulate your own kind of idea of what their personalities were like in the ways that they're not written or drawn. So for me, it would be a series of graphic novels or comic books.
Wow. Yeah, I really like that.
Thank you.
I really I don't have anything that I like better than that.
It's not a competition.
I mean, no. I was thinking about like a video game, and thinking about, I mean, the possibilities in being able to play it. I mean, like, I know there's, Red Dead Redemption is, really popular Western title, but to have some type of game with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Hole in the Wall gang or Wild Gang, whatever the Wild Boys, if you want to get the Duran Duran song. It's not as interesting as this. I don't think it works. I was thinking about it, and I was like, there's enough in it. I was like, I would be interested to see how like a very creative theatrical artist would like mount a stage adaptation of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I don't know, but I don't know if that's something that works, like a Western translated to the stage, why?
It'd be hard to do.
What's the point?
With scenery and trains and stuff like that. Dan, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What is today's date that we are recording this?
Oh, why, today's Monday, September 26th, 2022.
Today is the 14th anniversary of Paul Newman's passing.
Oh, and we had no idea. All right.
But Dan, Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pour them all out.
Pour them all out for Mr. Paul Newman.
Pour out some Newman's Own salad dressing.
Yeah.
Dan, I also asked you that question because September 15th, 2022 wasn't that long ago, correct?
True.
Okay, so September 15th, 2022 is when the news drops that there is going to be a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid inspired series at Amazon. And I don't know
There's my idea.
I don't know who these guys are. Regé Jean Page and Glenn Powell are set to star in a series inspired by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid for Amazon. The streamer has handed the untitled project to a straight-to-series order. It comes from Joe and Anthony Russo's AGBO. Deals are not yet done. This is how new this is. Bridgerton star Page, that guy, who starred in Russo's The Gray Man, is expected to play Butch Cassidy, with Top Gun Maverick star set to play the Sundance Kid in the series, which is reportedly set in an alternate America, which makes sense because Page is, I don't know, African American, or I'm not sure exactly. The Russos will exec produce with Kaz and Ryan Firpo writing the script and exec producing along with Page and Powell. Okay.
Okay.
This is just interesting information, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like there's all of the. It's just like it's hard for me because I feel like a lot of these stars, and all due respect to them, because for the most part I'm not familiar with their work and their acting, but it just feels like a cookie cutter, who's that person this year that we're putting in these things. Okay. And it just, it's hard to see because Paul Newman and Robert, it's I just feel like there's no stars anymore. I'm turning into a Martin Short character.
Well, okay. I am going to reserve judgment. And when if this series comes out, because it's so fresh in the news, if this series comes out, I will watch at least the first episode and report back, because I don't want to, because look, I don't know these guys. That's not what my complaint is not. It just, it feels like we don't commit. We don't build stars. I feel like, I don't know. I want these, because Redford was relatively new. He wasn't unknown when they did it. Yeah. But no, it's just, I don't know. I guess it just feels like there's a lack of the. Yeah, I'm going to reserve judgment. Sorry. Well, okay. I think that we're getting into a different discussion right now, because I think that a lot of, at least what I'm hearing, and it might not be exactly what you're saying, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the idea of, actors being kind of a bigger presence and kind of having a stronger identity in who they are in their roles has changed quite a bit. Is that something along the lines of what you're saying?
It sounds like it.
Okay, fair enough. So something that you also have to remember is that film has only been around 100 years. And in the 60s, you certainly had a much smaller sample size of, productions being made and actors who are being put into them. You're still in a lot of the studio system mentality where it's just
yes,
here are our people, let's put this person in this and put that person in that. I think that
yes,
in this era in the 60s is when we really start seeing, a lot of these stars coming out and kind of having a little bit more say in the things that they're able to do in these films. And then, now we have everything. We have so many different ways that you can make and show movies. We've got
consume and
consume. We have so many streaming services that are also producing their own content, and it's way harder to stand out. And honestly, a lot of it is because of money, because it's like, okay, who can I get that's going to be a big enough draw that I can still afford? And then also it's just like, well, who has this many Instagram and TikTok followers so that we're able to promote this movie and make back our budget? And yes, of course, movies have been, financially driven for a long time. And yes, there are still movies that have a higher priority on the creative side of things, especially when you get to more independent films. But it is a lot harder to really nurture kind of the young stars who not only are there because they're popular, but are there because they're also very talented. And so that's where you have your Paul Newmans and your Robert Redfords, where they're just immensely talented, but they're also magnetic. Like there's something about them when they're on screen where you just like, can't help yourself but pay attention to every single thing that they're doing. Even in a movie that's slower, or maybe that, maybe that has a weird music video sequence to a weird song and they're on a bicycle and there's no point to anything. It's like, I don't care. I'm going to watch this because it's like, I can't stop watching this guy.
Well, yeah, no. And you make a good point about there not being as many venues for the production of content.
Oh, Dan, I couldn't hear. You froze. I couldn't hear a thing that you said.
Oh, you're frozen right now, but I can hear what you're saying.
Oh, weird.
So I'm going to speak again. I will say what I have just said, and it is that you make a good point that in the 1960s, you don't have as many ways to produce content. There are not as many places that are producing content. There are not as many venues for content. And not to mention, like, it's like, Paul Newman, I'm sure, like, did lots of TV gigs before he became a huge star. But then it's kind of like, if you want to go see the new Paul Newman movie, you need to go to the movie theater. And you go, and like, these people had to look amazing on a huge screen.
Yeah. And just thinking about the way that things are today, and some people, some actors who maybe have like a similar thing going as like Robert Redford or Paul Newman did. And I'm thinking of people like Ryan Gosling. They're people who have, starred in these major, huge movies, and people go and see them and know, because of that person or whatever. But nowadays, they also, like Ryan Gosling, like will appear in a Netflix movie that, like, I don't know, is maybe a little less than watchable. It's funny, like, they'll get into these situations where they're part of these other projects that for one reason or another aren't, at the same level as the other things that they're doing. And not to knock Netflix productions, because they do some amazing things, but like, there are certain ones where it's just like they've put a lot of their eggs in this one basket and they've got a lot of star power in it, but it's just, not all that great. And somebody who has that star power like him, like even that can't save it.
Right. And I think, and I think that they kind of are like, all right, we know that we are going to get X number of hits on these movies because of the algorithms and, these people being involved in it. So this is what the math tells us. There's not as much of a concern in quality whereas like Netflix being the example, but I think it really applies to all of these streaming venues. it's not like they don't put out quality work. It's just kind of where they are focusing that quality and where they're focusing. I feel like it's like a lot of it is investment in, content creators and, like Adam McKay's last movie, Don't Look Up, was a Netflix movie. And Adam McKay directed who is, I mean, on top of, the Will Ferrell comedies, you don't look at The Big Short and Vice. Like just some of the best, satire, reality based films and satires in recent memory.
And also in Don't Look Up, and it's not that everybody loved this one. I enjoyed it. I liked it. But you have Meryl Streep, Leonardo DiCaprio, you have, Jonah Hill, you have some of the great actors of our generation. And I do include Jonah Hill in that. He's,
aside from two-time Academy Award nominee.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's sometimes you have to remember, like, oh yeah, that's right. He's also awesome aside from being a goofball. But it's like, that's
what I'm talking about. You talk about a cast like that, and it's like I'm gonna sound like grumpy old man, but like there was, a time where it's like that would have been the premiere magazine cover, like the end of the year, because that would have been the big movie coming out at Christmas, and it's like, oh my, all of the stars, Streep, DiCaprio, Lawrence, all of these amazing, who isn't is Chiwetel Ejiofor in that as well?
I don't remember.
Is it?
But you also have
Jonah Hill.
Kate Blanchett.
Right.
It's amazing.
Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but also with Netflix last year, you also had The Power of the Dog, which was clearly one of the best movies of the year.
Chalamet. Chalamet is in.
Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah. That was quite the guys. But Power of the Dog, that was another Netflix production that was just like, oh no, this is like one of the best movies of the year.
Prestige.
Easy. Yeah.
Prestige.
And anyway, I know that we went off into a whole big thing, but I think that also we're very lucky that Paul Newman and Robert Redford decided to become actors at the time that they decided to become actors. Because they could easily, if they were born in a different generation, if they were born, if they were born in the 70s, then who knows if now they would have had, the same type of magnetism as they did when the sample pool was a lot smaller. Plus, also, how many people emulated their careers after those two guys?
Forget it. It brings us back to, there we go, Clooney and Pitt.
Clooney and Pitt, yeah. And we're lucky for it, they haven't each had, the most amazing successes, but they're beloved for a lot of the
they've each had amazing successes, but not all of them.
Yeah. So anyway, we've been doing some ranting on this one.
Yeah, but it's okay. It all comes back because it comes back to when you watch a movie like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and you really are just like, man, I wish I could just go to my local cinema and like buy popcorn and sit and like spend an afternoon watching this movie.
Yeah.
And or like there's not an or something like it. It's those opportunities are few and far between.
You are frozen.
Am I unfrozen now?
Okay, now you're there. It's not like there's what?
It's not like there's like regular opportunities to do that. They're few and far between. And you really have to, be on the lookout when something like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is going to be screening somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just, it's something, it's another thing I envy about, living in those times, and, living in a time when you could just go out on a rainy Sunday afternoon and like buy a ticket for like $2. And
Dan, you just sounded a little bit like Mitch Cohen. Anyway, Dan, what are we going to talk about on our next episode?
And the popcorn. So the next episode, we are going to be talking about baseball, because, hey, it's the fall. Baseball season is winding down, so it's a good time to take a look at a baseball movie, and we will be watching The Natural from 1984.
Imagine that.
Starring
Robert Redford?
Redford. Huh.
Interesting.
And Wilford fucking Brimley.
Hell yeah.
Kim Basinger, Glenn Close. I'm sure there's other people. Directed by Barry Levinson.
I'm sure there's other people.
There's other people in the movie.
Wow,
no,
Dan, what a daring bet you just made.
What you don't know is that I'm just rattling the names off the top of my head.
Oh yeah, of course.
So, like, I'm not just disregarding everybody else who's in the
Robert
Natural.
Duvall.
Oh, him. Yes.
Robert Prosky. Speaking of famous Roberts.
Oh yeah.
Michael
Duvall.
Madsen.
No shit.
And
Michael
just because
Madsen.
I want to say it, Alan Fudge.
Alan Fudge. You know what they say. I don't know.
Alan Fudge.
You know what they say about
Around the
Alan
corner,
Fudge?
that's where you can find Alan Fudge. Well, Dan, as you are on the run from LaFours, I wish you a good journey.
Good journey.